Support for the distinction between the two developmental prototypes comes from several large-scale longitudinal studies reviewed by Moffitt 2007, including the famous Dunedin study, of which she is a co-author. In this ongoing study, which started in Dunedin, New Zealand in 1972, more than 1,000 children were first studied at 3 years of age and were then followed every 2 to 3 years up to the age of 45 years, as per the latest wave. The study has accumulated an extremely rich set of data from the different developmental stages, including adult mental health and personality measures, criminal offending, and work-related and economic measures. Moffitt 2002. However, other authors have cautioned against regarding adolescents' limited antisocial behavior as a kind of benign form of aggression. When they compared adolescents' limited aggressive individuals with continuously non-aggressive individuals, Roisman et al. 2010 found that adolescents' limited individuals differed significantly from continuously non-aggressive individuals on a number of childhood risk factors, such as showing a more difficult temperament in early childhood and experiencing less maternal sensitivity in infancy and childhood. The authors concluded that although the individual and environmental risk factors of adolescents' limited aggressive use may be less extreme than those of the early onset life course persistent individuals, they clearly experience risks during their pre-adolescent years that have been reliably linked with later antisocial behavior. Roisman et al. 2010. In conclusion, the longitudinal studies reviewed in this section showed that there is evidence for both stability and change in aggressive behavior in the course of childhood and adolescent development. With regard to stability, Moffitt, 1993, argued that only a small group of highly aggressive children fall into the life course persistent group and account for the observed stability of aggressive behavior. However, as shown by other studies, such stability is also due to a comparatively large group of individuals who show little aggression throughout the different developmental stages. At the same time, there is evidence for both escalation and decline of aggression in individual biographies. To understand these different trajectories, it is necessary to take a closer look at the emotional and cognitive processes involved in the instigation and regulation of aggressive behavior. Emotional and cognitive processes associated with the development of aggressive behavior. To understand why some children are more aggressive than others and continue to be so in the course of development, both affective and cognitive processes have been examined. The psychological theories of aggression reviewed in Chapter 2 explain how hostile affect, such as anger, and hostile information processing pave the way to aggressive behavior, not only in a given situation, but also over time. Children with deficits in emotional regulation and impulse control are more likely to develop and sustain aggressive behavior patterns. These children are often perceived as having a difficult temperament and find it hard to constrain their aggressive impulses in an age-appropriate way. To assess deficits in anger regulation as risk factors for the development of aggressive behavior, Rolfe and colleagues developed an observational measure in which elementary school children were exposed to an anger-eliciting situation to record their affective responses. The children were told that they would be able to win an attractive prize if they managed to build a tower of bricks in a given period of time. The bricks were manipulated so that the tower kept collapsing. 3 years later, the same children were tested again with an age-adapted task of a similar nature, asking them to make a tower out of 7 dice. Because one of the dice was pyramid-shaped, the tower was impossible to build despite the manipulated image provided. The task is illustrated in Figure 3.2. Figure 3.2, an observational measure of anger regulation in childhood. Okay, so you can see from 6 to 10 years old, they're trying to build this tower that's impossible to build, and they're doing the same thing with dice at age 9 to 13 years old. Children's behavioral strategies for regulating their anger when they failed to build the tower were observed, distinguishing between maladaptive, e.g., venting the anger, verbal and visual focus on the frustrating stimulus, and adaptive, solution-oriented strategies. Maladaptive anger regulation significantly correlated with teacher ratings obtained 10 months later of how frequently the child had shown physical and relational aggression in the past 6 months and to what degree the aggressive behavior was reactive, that is, shown in response to a provocation. Rolfe, Bushing, and Craigie, 2017. Extending the longitudinal analysis to a total of 3 years, the path for maladaptive anger regulation to teacher-rated aggressive behavior was still significant. By then, children were old enough to provide reliable and valid self-reports of aggressive behavior, and these reports also correlated significantly with maladaptive anger regulation observed 3 years earlier. Moreover, maladaptive anger regulation was a significant prospective predictor of problems with peers, as assessed through self, parent, and teacher ratings. Individual differences in experiencing and handling anger are thought to be more closely related to reactive aggression, i.e., aggression shown in response to a provocation, than to proactive or unprovoked aggression. For example, children who showed more anger, as established through physiological data and observations of anger expression, when losing in a game, were also rated by their teachers to be more reactively aggressive, but not more proactively aggressive. Being able to regulate anger in an adaptive way can be seen as a facet of self-control, defined as the capacity to stop, override, or alter unwanted behaviors. Lower habitual self-control has been linked consistently to a greater tendency to show aggressive behavior, see Chapter 4. Recent longitudinal evidence shows that the basis for individual differences in self-control is laid in early childhood. A study following participants from infancy to adolescence showed that high maternal sensitivity and a stable home environment, assessed when the children were between 6 and 15 months of age, predicted higher levels of children's self-control at the age of 4.5 years, and higher self-control predicted lower levels of overt reactive and relational aggression up to the age of 15 years. Self-control requires a set of cognitive abilities grouped under the heading of executive function that are involved in the regulation of aggressive and antisocial behavior. Executive function, EF, comprises cognitive activities that govern goal-directed action and planning of behavior and enable adaptive responses to novel, complex, or ambiguous situations. It is important for self-regulation, including anger regulation, and consists of 4 main components: inhibition, working memory updating, shifting, and planning. Rolfe et al., 2018, investigated the relationship between executive function and different types of aggression in a 3-wave longitudinal study over 3 years with primary school children aged 6 to 11 years at the start of the study. The lower children scored on the measures of executive function at the start of the study, the higher their aggression was rated by their teachers 1 and 3 years later, controlling for initial levels of aggressive behavior. This was true for both physical and relational aggression. With regard to the different functions of aggressive behavior, deficits in executive function were related to increased reactive aggression over time, but did not predict proactive aggression. This ties in with the idea of proactive aggression as cold-blooded, planned aggression, for which affect control is less critical than for reactive aggression, which is more strongly based on anger and therefore may be more affected by deficits in executive function. Moreover, a longitudinal study showed that early onset of chronic anger predicted more antisocial behavior problems in adulthood as compared with a later onset, especially among boys, but that good cognitive control in adolescence buffered these negative outcomes. Self-control, capacity to stop, override, or alter unwanted behaviors. Executive function, cognitive activities that govern goal-directed action and planning of behavior and enable adaptive responses to novel, complex, or ambiguous situations. A second basic ability relevant for understanding the development of aggressive behavior is theory of mind. Theory of mind refers to the ability to form a mental representation of the internal states of other people and is differentiated into two facets: cognitive theory of mind, describing the ability to make inferences regarding others' beliefs, intentions, or desires, and affective theory of mind, referring to the ability to infer others' emotions. Numerous studies have examined the relation between theory of mind and aggressive behavior in children. Hall et al. 2018 conducted a three-wave analysis of the reciprocal relations of theory of mind with physical and relational aggression. Lower theory of mind prospectively predicted both forms of aggression as rated by the child's class teachers. These results are in line with the predictions derived from the SIP model, described in Chapter 2, that deficits in theory of mind may lead to biased or deficient social information processing, which in turn may lead to more aggressive behavior. As noted by Lemeries and Arsenio 2000, emotional responses and processes of emotional regulation play a role at each stage in the SIP model, as the way in which social information is interpreted at one stage elicits affective responses that shape the processing of information at the subsequent stages. For example, if another person's behavior is interpreted as malicious at the second stage of the model, interpretation of cues, this is likely to elicit anger. If the person is overwhelmed by the feeling of anger, this will stand in the way of a balanced appraisal of the possible courses of action and precipitate the activation of the intention to strike back in the third step of the model, the clarification of goals. Among more specific cognitive precursors to aggression, aggression-related attitudes were found to play an important role. For example, Erdley and Asher, 1998, found that children who saw aggression as a legitimate form of social behavior showed higher levels of aggressive behavior, as evidenced by peer ratings and the children's own responses to ambiguous interactions described in hypothetical scenarios. The difference in aggressive behavior as a function of legitimacy beliefs was found for both boys and girls, but levels of aggression were generally lower for girls than for boys. See Chapter 4 for a discussion of gender differences. Beliefs about the legitimacy of aggression can be seen as part of individuals' aggressive scripts, developed on the basis of direct and vicarious learning experiences. Another feature of the scripts of children who show high levels of aggression is the perception of hostile intent in others. Children with a hostile attribution bias habitually interpret their peers' behavior in the light of a pre-existing knowledge structure that sees potentially harmful behavior by others as an expression of their hostile intentions. Dodge, 2006, argued that, in young children, equating hostile intent with negative outcome is a common reaction when they experience harm from others. In the course of socialization, children learn to acquire a benign attributional style, that is, they learn to consider the possibility that the other person's actions were not intended to be harmful. According to this view, a learning process is required to make benign attributions, and children who maintain a hostile attributional style beyond early childhood show deficits in this learning process. Every time they attribute behaviors of others to hostile intentions and react with an aggressive response, the link between the perception of hostile intent and aggression is reinforced, a cycle which may account for the long-term stability of aggressive behavior. Hostile attribution bias, hostile attributional style, tendency to attribute hostile intentions to a person who has caused harm when it is unclear whether or not the harm was caused accidentally or on purpose. A meta-analysis including 41 studies with over 6,000 participants confirmed the link between hostile attributional style and aggression in children. Orobio de Castro et al. 2002. A more recent systematic review of 27 studies with children and adolescents concluded that the hostile attribution bias is related to both physical and relational aggression. Regarding the functions of aggression, Hostile attribution bias was significantly related to reactive aggression, but not to proactive aggression when reactive aggression was parceled out. Little evidence of gender differences in the associations between hostile attribution bias and aggression was found in this review. The connection between hostile knowledge structures and aggression over time was demonstrated in a longitudinal study by Burkus et al. 1999. They obtained mother and teacher ratings of aggressive behavior in kindergarten and grade 8. In grade 8, they also assessed children's attributions of hostile intent in response to hypothetical conflict scenarios and their hostile knowledge structures, i.e., the salience of hostility-related thoughts. In support of their hypotheses, Burkus et al. Found that children who had hostile knowledge structures were more likely to attribute hostility in a specific social encounter and were also rated as more aggressive by their mother and teacher. In addition, they found that the link between early aggression and aggressive behavior in grade 8 was mediated by hostile knowledge structures. A construct related to the hostile attribution bias is justice sensitivity, which refers to the dispositional tendency to perceive events and experiences as unjust. Victim sensitivity characterizes a cognitive structure in which individuals habitually see themselves treated unjustly by others and respond with anger and the desire to retaliate. By contrast, perpetrator sensitivity refers to the perception of one's own actions as causing injustice to others. A study by Bondu and Crahy, 2015, showed that victim sensitivity was positively correlated with parent and teacher-rated aggression among children and adolescents, with consistent associations for both physical and relational and both proactive and reactive aggression. Perpetrator sensitivity showed a negative correlation with aggressive behavior, indicating that being aware of the possibility that one's own actions cause injustice to others may reduce the use of aggressive behavior. The propensity towards hostile attributions may be socially shared and thus reinforced among peers. A study of adolescence by Halligan and Phillips, 2010, found significant correlations within peer groups and in their members' tendency to attribute hostile intent, and the link was particularly close in reciprocal friendships. This shows that the stability of hostile attributional style is also promoted through associations with like-minded peers. In combination, the research discussed in this section has demonstrated that individual differences in aggression emerge as a result of both affective and cognitive variables, inability to regulate anger in a socially acceptable way, and schematic habitual ways of information processing that promote aggression as an adequate response in social interactions are intrapersonal risk factors for the development of aggression. Influences of the social environment on the development of aggression. A variety of adverse influences in the social environment have been examined as risk factors for the development of aggressive behavior. These include proximal risk factors in the family and peer group, as well as more distal risk factors, such as high levels of neighborhood violence or exposure to violent media content. Therefore, a comprehensive analysis of the developmental risk factors for aggression needs to include such interpersonal and environmental factors and examine how they operate and interact with intrapersonal risk factors. In the current section, we will focus on two proximal risk factors: family and peer relationships. The family is the most important social context for young children's development, critically shaping the way they feel, think, and act. The effects of the family environment on the development of aggression have been analyzed in a broad body of research. A well-established family risk factor for the development of aggressive behavior is harsh parental discipline. This finding is unsurprising from a social learning perspective, because children whose parents use harsh punishment come to believe that aggression is an acceptable form of conflict resolution. When parents respond to the child's non-compliance with coercion, they trigger further oppositional behavior that, in turn, leads to more coercive behavior by the parents. This coercive cycle becomes a stable feature of the parent-child relationship, consolidating the child's aggressive behavior over time. The bidirectional influence between parents and children was also demonstrated in a 3-wave longitudinal study by Craigie et al. 2015. The more aggressive children and adolescents were at time 1, as rated by themselves, their parents, and their teachers, the more parenting stress the parents reported at time 2, and the more aggressive their children were at time 3. The mediating role of parent stress was demonstrated by a significant indirect path from initial aggression to later aggression via parenting stress. Witnessing and experiencing violence in the family are related risk factors for aggressive behavior, contributing to the transgenerational transmission of violence within families, as we will discuss in more detail in Chapter 8. Moreover, economic pressure may trigger and exacerbate negative parental behavior by increasing hostility in parents that is directed against the children, as shown in a 3-year longitudinal study by Williams et al. 2007.